Hello everyone, welcome or welcome back to my channel. My name is Hannah if you're new here, and in today's video we are talking about 15 book recommendations that are less than 300 pages. Now you might have some reading goals you're trying to achieve by the end of the year, or you just don't have a lot of time to read and you need something quick and excellent at the same time. So this is a video for you. I kind of broke up these recommendations sort of by genre. We've got fantasy, we've got sci-fi, we've got romance, we've got horror. Transparently, I love both short sci-fi and horror the most. I think it's one of the most effective ways to tell a really fun sci-fi and really intense horror story. So I tend to gravitate towards those two genres in terms of short fiction. And I love my chunky fantasies, to be honest. But without further ado, let's talk about the fantasy books. One of the best fantasy books I've ever read, period, let alone it only being 87 pages, is The Lies of the Ajungo by Moses Osi Utomi. This is sort of a chosen one sort of narrative where there is a young boy who travels outside of his city seeking water. He lives in a desert, water is scarce, and he wants to save his people. And this is one of the most emotional, gut-wrenching fantasy stories I've ever read. And there's so much world building and plot packed into these 86 pages. Not only is it a fantastic read, but it is incredibly short as well. Now we're talking fantasy with maybe a hint of romance in it. The last one was more of an epic high fantasy narrative, and I have to talk about Grace Draven and Radiance. Radiance is about a human and a non-human having an arranged marriage and then falling in love, and this is excellent. The banter between the two main characters is precious and sweet, and their relationship is truly what drives this story. But this also has a pretty excellent fantasy plotline, especially if you continue on in this series. It becomes more of a fantasy story and less of a romance as you read further in the series. So I highly recommend Radiance, and I think Radiance is about 280 pages. Another fantasy romance, this time an urban fantasy romance, is Small Miracles by Olivia Atwater. This is my favorite Olivia Atwater, and this is about a fallen angel who is tempting a mortal to commit some type of sin, and this mortal is so pure and innocent and good that they're having a really hard time convincing the mortal to do anything bad, including leaving work 15 minutes early. And so this is a romance between this fallen angel and the mortal, and this has great trans representation. This is a very sweet romance. This is also about a family coming together after a death in the family and kind of exploring that grief as well. So not only is this a sweet, fun romance, but this is also a pretty hard-hitting emotional story as well. And Small Miracles is only 250 pages. Next, let's talk horror. One of my favorite genres for short works. I tend to only have certain bandwidth for horror, and they tend to align more closely with shorter books that are less than 300 pages. The first one we have to talk about is Our Wives Under the Sea by Julia Armfield. Now this is a slow-paced literary horror, I would classify this. And this is following two women, two timelines, and two perspectives. In the past timeline, we're following one woman as she is on an undersea expedition and something goes wrong. And then in the other timeline and the other point of view character is the woman who was left behind, and it is the aftermath of that event and kind of what happens to this couple after some sort of tragedy occurs on the submarine. This is eerie and sad and slow and contemplative, and I cried my eyes out reading this one. Not only did it have that great eerie vibe from the horror, but it was also a very emotional, sapphic romance. Our Wives Under the Sea is only 232 pages. Then we have Ring Shout by P. Djeli Clark, which is 185 pages, and this is a short horror story set in the early 1900s about basically a group of women who hunt down Ku Klux Klan members, and in this world the Ku Klux Klan members are monsters, not just in the acts that they do in like real life horror, but they're truly actually like these demon creatures, and so we're following this band of hunters hunting them down. And this was not only really creepy, this is also really sad, and I actually was incredibly emotionally invested in these for women, and I think it's for and their journey and their relationship with each other as well. The last tale of the Flower Bride is 292 pages, and again, I would classify this as like a literary horror with some dark fairy tale vibes. We're following an unnamed bridegroom, as he's called in this book, as he marries a woman named Indigo, who says, hey, don't look up my past at all, don't ask me any questions about it. And he's like, okay. And of course, something from her past creeps up, and he's kind of unraveling all of that drama. This is also following a second point of view with Indigo's childhood best friend, and her name is Azure, and so we're following Azure and Indigo in the past from Azure's point of view and kind of what happened in Indigo's past that way, and then the two storylines converge in the end. And I loved this. This is not going to be for everybody, but it certainly was for me. I like this type of like slow-paced literary horror when it's short. At 176 pages, we have The Scourge Between Stars by Ness Brown. Now, this is the story of a woman who is the second in command of the ship, but the captain is like comatose and refusing to leave his room, so she's kind of taking the mantle of captain in his absence, and it's also her father, so it's very complicated emotional familial connection there. And something spooky starts happening to the crew. And this was very eerie. This had great atmosphere. I think there's nothing scarier personally than space in general. And adding some sort of a little extra horror sauce in there makes these types of sci-fi horrors incredibly terrifying to me. So I really enjoyed the adventure of this story, as well as the complex character dynamics going on in this one too. Gotta talk about T. Kingfisher, and T. Kingfisher does such a good job with short stories and novellas, and these are the two that I'm going to call out. But I have a whole video talking about T. Kingfisher and breaking down every single one of her books if you'd like to check that out. But the two I'm highlighting today are Nettle and Bone and What Moves the Dead. We'll start with What Moves the Dead. This is an Edgar Allan Poe The Fall of the House of Usher retelling about a soldier going to a childhood friend's estate, and things are crumbling and in shambles, and uncovering what's going on. This is 165 pages, and then Nettle and Bone is more of a fairy tale-esque horror light story. This is almost leaning fantasy, about a woman whose sister is in an arranged marriage with a bad man, and so our main character decides to rescue her sister, and along the way she gets like a ragtag group of friends of unlikely heroes to help her sister escape this evil man. These are both incredible. It is 243 pages. But I adore both of these and T. Kingfisher's works in general. I have to talk about A Dowry of Blood next. This is a Dracula's bride's retelling from the perspective of one of the brides as she is writing letters to Dracula detailing her life, their relationship, and the abuses that she suffered. I think about this book all the time, like just in my day-to-day. I love the exploration in here. The writing is impeccable, and the story is immaculate and complicated. And I really, really love this, and I will keep recommending it forever. A Dowry of Blood is 235 pages, at least my indie pub edition is. I don't know if the traditionally published work is longer page length wise, but it's the same word count roughly. Let's talk sci-fi. I love short sci-fi, and a great example of short sci-fi is Prime Meridian by Silvia Moreno Garcia. This is probably one of her lesser known works, but this is a really interesting one about kind of a woman coming into her own in this sci-fi story. She's basically bound and determined to go to Mars and like kind of start her life over, but she has to go through some trials and tribulations to get there, and we're following her on Earth as she is, you know, trying to get her way onto the ship that will go to Mars. And there's a really cool sci-fi element in here. I don't really want to spoil it because this one is only 124 pages, but there's some great sci-fi technology in this story. And I love Silvia Moreno Garcia's coming of age type works. Next, I'm going to be talking about Becky Chambers, and the two I'm going to highlight are her short works, To Be Taught If Fortunate and A Psalm for the Wild Built. To Be Taught If Fortunate is a series of vignettes following a crew of scientists as they are studying potentially habitable planets to move Earth, you know, colonize other worlds, as they are getting transmissions from Earth and they get some bad news. And this is about the relationships between these characters, and this is fabulous. And then A Psalm for the Wild Built is a quiet, contemplative, slow-paced sci-fi about a tea monk who is burnt out, essentially, and comes across a wild robot, a robot that comes out of the forest. And that it's about the relationship between the two of them, as well as struggling with burnout and feeling like your life has no meaning. A Psalm for the Wild Built is 124 pages, and To Be Taught If Fortunate is 153. I also love Sarah Gailey, and Sarah Gailey has a great duology. The first book of that duology is River of the Teeth, and A Taste of Marrow is the sequel, and these are both very, very short. This is an alternate history where hippos have gone wild in like Louisiana and are actually causing like havoc. And so this is kind of like a ragtag group of almost criminals who are hired for a job of like corralling some wild hippos. And this is just a really fun adventure story if you like, you know, gray morality, if you like trans characters. This has got so much adventure packed into these short little works. River of Teeth is 142 pages, and A Taste of Marrow is 194-ish. And last and greatest, to be honest. This is one of my favorite reads of all time, let alone it only being 198 pages, is This Is How You Lose the Time War by Amal El-Mohtar and Max Gladstone. I do not shut up about this book. This is about two women on opposite sides of an intergalactic war, red and blue, and they write taunting notes to each other that turn into love letters, and how they deal with the consequences of being on opposite sides of this massive war. The writing is scrumptious, the romance is delectable, and it's short, and the sci-fi concepts in here are truly mind-boggling, to the point of you just kind of have to let the story wash over you. Don't think about this one too hard, in my opinion, because that's a little confusing. But if you're into that, you know, I highly, highly recommend This Is How You Lose the Time War. All right, those were roughly 15 books that are less than 300 pages. Let me know some of your favorite short stories and novellas. I would love to know in the comments down below. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in another video of mine very soon. Bye!